She always trusted him more than anyone else in the family. So when he placed the papers in front of her and said it was just a simple authorization, something to help her with the errands she no longer had energy to face, she didn't hesitate. She signed without reading the fine print, without imagining that a single signature could unravel everything she believed about loyalty. The rest of the family only realized something was wrong when she suddenly stopped answering their calls. By then, the damage had already begun. At first, they thought she was simply tired or overwhelmed, but the excuses kept coming, always delivered by him, always wrapped in a tone that demanded trust. He controlled the visits, controlled the conversations, controlled the narrative, until even her closest relatives started to feel like strangers to her life. When they finally discovered the truth behind that signature, behind that quiet moment at the kitchen table, it was too late. The power she had given him was absolute, and he was already using it. And now the family had to face a terrifying question. How do you save someone who doesn't even know they're in danger? Helena Mitchell had always been the kind of woman people felt safe around. She carried a softness in her voice, a gentleness in the way she moved through the world, and after her husband died, that softness only deepened. Her family tried to stay close, offering company, dinners, weekends together, but grief has its own strange gravity. It pulls some people inward. For Helena, that gravitational pull led her straight toward one person, her nephew, Daniel. He became her anchor, the one who showed up when the others couldn't, the one who knew exactly what to say to quiet the heaviness inside her chest. Daniel had always been charming, even as a child. He knew how to make people laugh, how to slip into their trust without ever appearing to ask for it. When he grew older, that charm sharpened into something more polished, something that made people lean toward him instinctively. Helena admired him, maybe even depended on him more than she realized. He started accompanying her to medical appointments, then to the bank, then to every mundane errand she once handled herself. It felt natural at first, even comforting, like having a son she never had. Her children noticed the shift, but they brushed it off as harmless. After all, Daniel was family, he was helping, and Helena seemed calmer with him around. But there was something in the way he lingered, always stepping between Helena and anyone who tried to ask too many questions, that unsettled them in ways they couldn't quite articulate. He claimed he was protecting her nerves, her peace of mind, and Helena, grateful for the attention during the loneliest period of her life, believed him completely. Little by little, her independence eroded. Daniel encouraged her to let go of small responsibilities first, paying bills, organizing paperwork, handling phone calls that stressed her out. His voice was always patient, soothing, never pushy. She mistook his calculated persistence for genuine care. He made her tea while she signed papers she didn't fully read. He sat beside her during appointments and answered questions directed at her. The lines of control blurred so slowly that Helena never saw them tightening. Her family began noticing subtle changes. Helena seemed forgetful about things only Daniel handled. She deferred to him in conversations that had nothing to do with him. When her daughter asked why Daniel was suddenly managing her finances, Helena simply smiled and said he was making her life easier. The confidence in her voice disarmed them. No one wanted to accuse a helpful family member of overstepping, especially when Helena defended him so warmly. But beneath the smooth surface, something had shifted. Daniel's presence became constant, almost strategic. He organized her mail before she could see it. He answered her phone, claiming she was resting. He redirected conversations, always keeping himself positioned as Helena's indispensable guardian. And Helena, yearning for someone to lean on, saw none of it as unusual. She was simply grateful. What no one realized yet, not even Helena herself, was that Daniel wasn't just stepping into her life. He was quietly taking it. The day Helena signed the document didn't feel significant at all. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon, the kind that passes unnoticed. Rain tapped softly against the kitchen window while Daniel sorted through a small stack of papers he claimed were just routine things. Helena sat across from him, hands wrapped around a warm mug of chamomile tea, trusting the same calm presence that had guided her through months of emotional fog. When he slid a single sheet toward her, she barely looked at it. He spoke softly, reassuringly, telling her it would help him take care of errands she no longer had the energy for. She didn't see the hesitation in his eyes, nor the way he angled the page so she wouldn't read too closely. She asked him one question, whether it was really necessary, and he responded with a smile that made her feel safe. He said he only wanted to make things easier, that she had carried the weight of the world for too long. His voice dipped with sincerity, and Helena felt her chest loosen with relief. Without thinking twice, she signed her name in the blank space. Her handwriting trembled slightly, but Daniel reached out and squeezed her hand, telling her she'd done the right thing. She believed him. She had no reason not to. For the next few weeks, everything seemed normal. Daniel still stopped by almost daily, still handled the small tasks Helena found overwhelming. But now there were subtle differences, shifts so small at first that no one outside the house could have noticed. He began walking into her home as if it were his own. He answered questions directed at her with a confident authority she didn't question. He collected her mail before she could open it and organized her documents into folders that somehow never remained where she left them. Whenever Helena asked about something, Daniel always had an explanation ready, always polished, always gentle. But behind that gentle tone lay something else, a quiet ownership. With the power of the document she had signed, Daniel began managing her accounts. At first, it was under the guise of helping. Then it became habit. Then it became control. He made transfers to cover expenses, negotiated with her bank without mentioning it to her, and contacted real estate agents as though the properties were his to handle. Helena sensed none of it. She trusted him so completely that she stopped questioning the details of her own life. Her family, however, sensed something was off. Helena's daughter noticed strange gaps in conversations, mentions of payments she didn't recall, decisions she didn't remember making. When she confronted Daniel, he responded with an ease that felt rehearsed. He said Helena was confused sometimes, that stress affected her memory, that he was just trying to protect her from overwhelm. His voice was so steady, so confident, that doubt crept into minds unprepared to confront betrayal. By the time anyone realized what the document truly represented, Daniel had already stepped beyond the boundaries of caregiving. He wasn't helping Helena anymore. He was steering her life, using her trust as both shield and weapon. If this chapter caught your attention, feel free to share a thought in the comments. And if you'd like to follow the unfolding of this story, your like and subscription help more than you know. Helena's world began to shrink gradually, so subtly that even she didn't realize how much space Daniel was occupying. At first, it felt like protection. He told her she needed rest, that the stress of constant visitors wasn't good for her health. He spoke with such calm assurance that Helena believed him, nodding along as if he were the one who knew her best. Soon, he started managing her schedule entirely, deciding who could visit, when she needed quiet, and what conversations were too draining. It didn't happen overnight, but inch by inch, Helena became a spectator in her own life. Her daughter, Laura, was the first to sense the walls closing in. Every time she tried to visit, Daniel intercepted with excuses that sounded well practiced. "She's not feeling up to it today," he would say, or "She had a rough night, and let's give her space." When Laura suggested stopping by anyway, he gently, yet firmly, insisted it wasn't a good idea. He sounded thoughtful, even considerate, but something in his tone felt final, as though Helena's home was no longer hers to open. Phone calls became filtered too. Daniel started answering Helena's cell to help her, claiming she misplaces it or gets overwhelmed. Messages went unanswered, or replies came hours later, oddly brief, lacking the warmth Helena usually carried in her words. Her relatives wondered if something was wrong, if grief had taken a deeper toll, but whenever they voiced concern, Daniel dismissed it with reassuring confidence. He said Helena was fragile, that the family's pressure was making things worse, and that he was the only one respecting her emotional limits. Inside the house, Helena found herself drifting. Daniel moved through the rooms with casual authority, sorting papers, adjusting her medications, organizing her finances, while Helena sat quietly, watching him handle things she once did herself. She assumed this was what support looked like. She assumed dependence was natural at her age. She assumed Daniel's presence was a blessing. What she didn't see was how each small decision taken from her tightened the net around her. Sometimes moments of unease flickered through her mind. She would reach for a bill she remembered setting aside, only to find it already filed away. She would try to call her sister, but the phone was inexplicably dead, or missing, or charging. She once mentioned wanting to visit her old friend Eleanor, and Daniel smiled patiently, telling her it wasn't a good idea because Eleanor's house had too many stairs. She accepted his reasoning because he always sounded so certain, so composed, so absolutely sure he knew what was best. Meanwhile, the family grew increasingly alarmed. They noticed the distance, the inconsistency in Helena's stories, the unfamiliar tone in the rare messages she sent. When Laura confronted Helena gently during a brief visit, Helena seemed confused, almost defensive, insisting everything was fine, that Daniel was taking care of everything. There was a tiredness in her eyes, a fog that hadn't been there before. And Daniel, always nearby, always listening, stepped in before the conversation could go any deeper. He placed a hand on Helena's shoulder and led her to rest, casting Laura a polite smile that felt like a warning disguised as kindness. The isolation was complete long before anyone realized it. Helena wasn't just alone, she had been carefully, methodically cut off from the world that loved her. The first red flag appeared almost by accident. Laura was sorting through old family photos when she noticed something strange on a real estate website, a listing for the Mitchell family's lakeside cabin. It wasn't the kind of property that appeared online without someone in the family knowing, certainly not without Helena mentioning it. The cabin was more than a building. It was decades of memories, summers of laughter, and her father's proudest accomplishment. Seeing it for sale felt like a blow to the chest. She checked the details once, then twice, convinced it had to be a mistake. But there it was, Helena's signature on the authorization documents, dated only 3 weeks earlier. Laura called her brother immediately. He hadn't heard anything either. Panic settled in as they both tried to reach Helena, only to be met with Daniel's smooth, dismissive voice. He insisted Helena was resting, that they shouldn't bother her with stressful matters. His tone was polite but guarded, as if he were speaking through a locked door. The siblings exchanged uneasy glances, both knowing something was deeply wrong. Determined to understand what was happening, Laura drove to Helena's house the next morning. She didn't call ahead. She just went. When she arrived, Daniel answered the door with a calm smile that didn't reach his eyes. He blocked the entrance slightly, just enough to assert control without appearing aggressive. Laura pushed past him, insisting she needed to see her mother. Daniel hesitated, then stepped aside, but the tension in the room thickened like fog. Helena was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a stack of papers she didn't seem to recognize. She looked smaller somehow, as though the walls had slowly pressed in around her. When Laura asked about the cabin, Helena's expression shifted into blank confusion. She blinked hard, like someone waking from a dream they can't quite remember. "We sold it?" she whispered. It didn't sound like a statement. It sounded like a question. Daniel stepped in immediately, placing a reassuring hand on Helena's shoulder. He explained in a gentle tone that the cabin required expensive upkeep, that it was too much for her at this stage in life, that they had discussed it at length. Helena nodded slowly, hesitantly, trying to piece together a memory that wasn't fully hers. Laura watched the exchange with growing dread. Something was deeply off. The decision, the explanation, even Helena's compliance, it all felt orchestrated. Over the next days, more unsettling discoveries surfaced. Bank accounts showed withdrawals Helena couldn't explain. A small antique shop she adored appeared closed, its rent unpaid. Insurance documents had been altered. Each revelation added another thread to a tapestry of manipulation carefully woven behind Helena's back. The siblings consulted an attorney, hopeful that anything could be reversed. But when they presented the documents, the lawyer's face shifted into the solemn expression of someone about to deliver a verdict no one wants to hear. Helena had signed a general power of attorney. Daniel had full legal authority. Every decision, every transaction, every signature carried the weight of legitimacy. By the time the family understood the magnitude of what Daniel had done, the truth settled with the heaviness of finality. The damage was not only done, it had been done legally, strategically, and in plain sight of a woman who trusted him completely. The confrontation happened on a grey morning, the kind where the sky itself seems unsure if it should rain. Laura and her brother Michael arrived at Helena's house without warning, fueled by urgency and a hollow fear neither wanted to name. Daniel opened the door with that familiar mask of calm, but this time they pushed past him with a resolve that caught even him off guard. He tried to maintain control, insisting they lower their voices, insisting Helena was resting, insisting, always insisting. But they were done listening. Helena was in the living room, sitting in her favorite armchair with a blanket wrapped around her legs. The moment she saw her children, a flicker of relief crossed her eyes, followed almost instantly by confusion. Laura knelt beside her, taking her hands gently, asking if she understood what had been happening with her finances, her home, her life. Helena's gaze drifted, as though searching for an answer she feared might not exist. She whispered Daniel's name, as if he were the only one who could clarify the world around her. The dependency ran so deep it frightened Michael more than the documents, more than the missing money, more than the cabin that was no longer theirs. Daniel appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, confidence returning in measured breaths. He claimed Helena was overwhelmed, that these conversations were too much for her, that they were making matters worse. But Laura wasn't backing down. She laid the evidence on the coffee table, printouts, bank statements, screenshots of contracts. Each page was a silent accusation. Helena stared at them with wide, unsteady eyes, processing each detail as though reading about someone else entirely. When the truth finally settled, Helena looked up at Daniel with a tremor in her voice that carried both heartbreak and disbelief. "Did I agree to all this?" she asked him. Her question hung in the room like a thin thread, stretched to its limit. Daniel hesitated, just long enough for Helena to understand the answer. Her face fell, not in anger, but in something far heavier, the slow, crushing realization that she had been betrayed by the person she trusted most. She didn't cry, she didn't shout. Instead, a quiet stillness overtook her, as though a candle inside her had been blown out. Michael felt his stomach twist. Laura felt her throat close. They wanted to reclaim something, to undo what had been done, to pull her out of the shadow Daniel had cast over her. But the lawyer had been clear. Legally, Daniel had acted within his rights. All they could do now was try to protect what little remained. The authorities were eventually contacted, but without proof of coercion, without signs of physical abuse, without explicit wrongdoing beyond moral bankruptcy, the investigation stalled before it began. Daniel knew the system well enough to navigate its blind spots. He had positioned himself perfectly, shielded by signatures penned in moments of vulnerability, each one binding Helena tighter to a reality she never intended. In the days that followed, Helena withdrew into herself, her trust fractured in ways that might never mend. Her children stayed by her side, determined to rebuild what they could, even if the cracks would always show. And although Daniel no longer held power in her home, the echoes of his influence lingered like shadows in the corners of every room. There was no turning back. What had been lost would remain lost. But the family, united in the aftermath, vowed that Helena would never again face the world alone.